The world of Thomas Hargreaves was measured in minutes, miles, and the heavy, metallic ticking of a broken dashboard clock. Break time 05s. Every morning began exactly the same way. At 5 a.m., the cold Manchester rain would lash against the thin glass windows of his small, damp flat on the outskirts of the city. Before the sun could even think of rising over the industrial horizon, Thomas would already be standing over the stove, his back aching with a familiar dull pain. He wore an old, faded flannel shirt with sleeves rolled up to his forearms, arms that bore the rough calluses of years of hard, unyielding labour. He looked down at the kitchen table. There, resting on a chipped porcelain plate, was a small, neatly sliced sandwich. Next to it sat 3 copper coins and a single crumpled £5 note, the absolute remainder of his weekly budget after paying for electricity. "Daddy?" A soft, sleepy voice drifted from the doorway. Thomas instantly wiped the exhaustion from his face, forcing a warm, practiced smile to his lips. Break time equals 05s. He turned around to see 6-year-old Poppy standing there, rubbing her eyes, her oversized winter coat, a second-hand purchase that was still 2 sizes too big, hung loosely from her small shoulders. Her bright eyes looked up at him, innocent and entirely unaware of the heavy financial collapse threatening to crush their tiny family. "Good morning, my princess," Thomas said, his voice a deep, gentle rumble that always made Poppy feel safe. He knelt down, adjusting the collar of her coat. "Eat up. We have a very busy day ahead of us." Poppy looked down at his shoes, old, worn-out leather boots that were splitting at the seams, held together by nothing more than a thin layer of industrial tape. "Daddy, your boots are wet again. Are you going to buy the new ones today?" Thomas felt a sharp, familiar pang of guilt strike his chest. He reached out, gently bopping her nose. "Don't you worry about my boots, Poppy. As long as your feet are warm, Daddy is perfectly fine. Today is going to be a good day. I can feel it." But Thomas knew it was a lie. He was a delivery courier for a low-end regional service, driving an ancient, rattling van through the congested, grey streets of Manchester. He couldn't afford childcare on the weekends, which meant whenever he took an extra Saturday shift to pay for rent, Poppy had to ride in the passenger seat, colouring in her books while he ran packages up and down concrete stairs. By 9:30 a.m., the dispatch radio crackled to life with an aggressive hiss. "Hargreaves, we've got a high priority. Break time equals .05s, Botsy hand, delivery legal tube for the executive floor at the Pennine Tower. It requires a direct, secure signature from the principal chief executive. No assistance, no drop-offs. If you don't get it signed by 10, the client pulls the contract. Move it." Thomas gripped the steering wheel, the Pennine Tower. It was the tallest, most intimidating monolithic skyscraper in the city centre. It was the headquarters of the Hastings Whitmore Group, a multi-billion-pound global empire that controlled half the shipping and logistics in the country. It was a world of polished marble, titanium elevators, and people who didn't look at men like Thomas unless they were ordering them to clear the way. 20 minutes later, Thomas was standing in the grand lobby of Pennine Tower. The air inside smelled of expensive cedarwood and high-end air filtration. He held the heavy leather document tube tightly against his chest. Because it was Saturday, the massive lobby was mostly empty, save for a few stern-faced security guards. "Poppy, listen to me," Thomas whispered, kneeling down by a plush leather sofa near the entrance. "Sit right here. Keep your coat on. Break time 05's, neon color in book. I will be down in exactly 5 minutes. Do not move for anyone, okay?" Poppy nodded solemnly, clutching her crayon. "Okay, Daddy. I'll be good." Thomas gave her a quick reassuring squeeze, then walked toward the high-speed glass elevators. As the lift shot upward toward the 60th floor, the city of Manchester shrunk beneath him into a grid of tiny, insignificant grey blocks. He adjusted the collar of his faded uniform jacket, feeling completely out of place. Rake break time equals 05 as. When the elevator doors silently slid open on the penthouse floor, Thomas stepped out onto a carpet, so thick it swallowed the sound of his heavy, taped boots. The executive floor was vast, open, and unexpectedly dark. The massive floor-to-ceiling motorized blinds were almost fully drawn, blocking out the harsh morning glare, leaving the room cast in heavy, dramatic shadows. And there, sitting behind a massive, dark mahogany desk that looked like a fortress, was Eleanor Hastings. Thomas stopped in his tracks, his breath catching slightly. Eleanor was famous in the business world, known as an unyielding, brilliant, break-time .5's and fiercely cold leader who had built the Hastings-Whitmore Group into an absolute superpower. She was a striking woman, dressed in a flawless, tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pinned back perfectly. But as Thomas stepped closer, he noticed the subtle, profound details. She wasn't looking at a computer screen. She was sitting in absolute, motionless silence. Her beautiful, clear eyes were open, but they were fixed completely forward, staring blankly into the empty air of the room. On the corner of her desk rested a sleek, silver-tipped graphite cane. Eleanor Hastings was completely blind. The room was deathly quiet, save for the faint, steady patter of rain against the reinforced glass windows 60 floors above the earth. Eleanor sat perfectly still in the shadows, an aura of absolute authority wrapping around her like armor, hiding a deep, break-time .05's heavily guarded loneliness that no one in the corporate world was ever allowed to see. Thomas swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and stepped forward into the silent room. The silence inside the penthouse office was thick, heavy, and absolute. Thomas stood perfectly still, his mud-splattered delivery boots buried slightly in the luxurious charcoal-grey carpet. He felt intensely small beneath the vast, high concrete ceilings, yet his primary focus remained entirely professional. He had exactly 3 minutes before he needed to get back down to the lobby to check on Poppy. He cleared his throat. The sound was sharp, cutting through the dead air of the 60th floor, like a sudden fracture in glass. Thomas stepped forward, holding out the leather document tube and the electronic clipboard. When he spoke, his voice carried the natural, unforced depth of a seasoned working man. A calm, exceptionally deep, break-time .05's resonant baritone that had softened over the years from singing a young girl to sleep in a damp apartment. "Good morning, ma'am," Thomas said, his tone measured and respectful. "I have a priority direct-hand delivery package from the Central Clearinghouse for Eleanor Hastings. Break time equals 05's. The dispatch order requires a physical confirmation signature on line 4, if you please." At the sound of his voice, the entire universe inside the room seemed to violently grind to a halt. Eleanor didn't just look up. Her entire body physically seized. Break time equals 05s. The expensive fountain pen she held in her right hand hovered a mere millimetre above a stack of corporate contracts, frozen mid-air. Her breathing, which had been slow and rhythmic, instantly hitched, catching sharply in her throat. Thomas watched, confused, as the commanding, impenetrable expression on the CEO's face vanished, replaced by an expression of raw, unadulterated shock. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her unseeing eyes dilated, straining as if she were trying to force her broken optic nerves to cut through the darkness. She wasn't looking at him. She was listening to him. She was filtering out the hum of the city, the rain on the glass, and the beating of her own chaotic heart. Break time meek 05s, focusing entirely on the echo of that precise cadence, the specific gravelly texture of his accent, and the way his voice dropped at the end of the sentence. "Say that again," Eleanor whispered. Her voice, usually a weapon of sharp corporate authority, was suddenly thin, trembling. Break time equals 05s, and completely stripped of its armour, Thomas blinked, shifting his weight from one worn boot to the other. I just need a confirmation signature, ma'am. On line 4. It's a legal requirement for the delivery." A tear, completely silent and unexpected, escaped the corner of Eleanor's right eye, tracing a slow line down her flawless cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She slowly let go of the fountain pen, allowing it to roll across the desk and drop onto the floor with a dull thud. Break time 05s. Ignoring her silver-tipped graphite cane, Eleanor stood up. Her hands braced against the smooth mahogany wood of her desk as she guided herself around the perimeter. She moved with a desperate, frantic urgency that completely contradicted her usual calculated grace. Break time equals 005s. She didn't care about her corporate dignity in this moment. She was being pulled forward by a ghost. Thomas instinctively stepped back, his professional instincts kicking in. "Ma'am, if you need me to call your assistant, stop. Do not move, please," she commanded, her voice cracking with an intense, overwhelming emotion that made Thomas's blood run cold. Guided entirely by the sound of his heavy breathing and the faint scent of rain and cheap laundry detergent clinging to his uniform, Eleanor closed the distance between them. She stepped dangerously close. So close that Thomas could see the subtle trembling of her lips. Break time equals .05s, so close that she could feel the cold dampness radiating from his flannel shirt. She tilted her head up toward his face, her blind eyes wide, searching the empty space between them. Slowly, hesitantly, she raised her right hand. Her fingers hovered in the air for a second before she leaned in, her lips inches away from his ear. When she spoke, she didn't use her CEO voice. She whispered a phrase so specific, so deeply buried in the nightmares of a forgotten past, that it struck Thomas like a physical blow. "Keep breathing, Ellie. Close your eyes, listen to my voice, and don't let go of my hand. I've got you." The words hung in the air, vibrating with a decade of terror and salvation. Thomas completely froze. The electronic clipboard slipped from his hand, tumbling onto the thick carpet. The breath died in his lungs. His knuckles turned stark white as his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. The room seemed to spin. the name Ellie, the exact order of those words, the gentle pleading cadence. Nobody in Manchester called the multi-billionaire tycoon Eleanor Hastings Ellie. Nobody alive knew those words except for one person, a terrified, break time equals 05's dying girl trapped in a crumpled cage of burning steel on the M62 Motorway exactly 10 years ago. He stared at the beautiful, blind woman standing before him, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "You!" Thomas choked out, his deep voice cracking for the first time in years. "It's you." Eleanor's hand finally made contact with his arm, her fingers gripping the rough, faded fabric of his delivery jacket with an aggressive, desperate strength, as if she were terrified that if she let go, he would vanish back into the shadows of the city forever. The heavy leather document tube remained forgotten on the floor, resting alongside the fallen electronic clipboard. The quiet hum of the executive floor felt entirely disconnected from the raw, emotional storm unfolding beside the grand mahogany desk. Eleanor's fingers remained tightly locked onto the rough, faded fabric of Thomas's jacket. Break time equaled 0.5's twice her hands trembling with a vulnerability that completely shattered her reputation as the unyielding, iron-willed titan of the Hastings-Whitmore group. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany door clicked open. "Miss Hastings?" Marcus, the fiercely loyal, sharp-eyed head of personal security, stepped into the office. Break time equals 05's, his hand instinctively hovered near his suit jacket as he noticed the strange, intense proximity between the blind billionaire and the mud-splattered delivery driver. "I heard a noise. Is everything all right? Do you need this courier removed?" Eleanor didn't turn her head. She didn't let go of Thomas's sleeve. Instead, her voice cut through the air with a sudden fierce authority that left no room for debate. "Get out, Marcus!" Marcus blinked, stunned. "But ma'am," I said. "Leave us!" Eleanor commanded, her voice cracking slightly with an overwhelming tide of emotion. "Lock the door from the outside. Do not let anyone on this floor. Do not interrupt me under any circumstances. Clear the line." Recognizing the absolute gravity in her tone, Marcus slowly stepped back, pulling the heavy door shut. The loud, metallic click of the deadbolt echoed through the vast space, sealing Thomas and Eleanor in a pocket of absolute isolation. "It's really you," Eleanor whispered, her voice softening into a trembling plea as she finally let go of his jacket. Her hands reached upward, her fingers gently brushing against his jawline, tracing the rough stubble and the deeply etched lines of exhaustion on his face. 10 years. I have spent 10 years looking for a ghost. I didn't know your name. I didn't know your face, but I knew your voice. I could never forget your voice." Thomas stood perfectly still, his breath shallow. The mention of 10 years ago dragged him violently back to a night he had spent a decade trying to bury. "The M62 Motorway," Thomas murmured, his deep baritone catching in his throat. "Mile marker 14. It was winter. The black ice. A multi-car pile-up," Eleanor continued, tears freely flowing down her face now. "My car was crushed beneath a lorry. It was upside down. The fuel tank was leaking, and the smoke, the black, suffocating smoke, was everywhere. I was pinned by the steering column. I was screaming, terrified, dying in the dark. Everyone else was running away. Break time 0.5's shouting that the vehicle was going to explode. "But someone didn't run," Thomas said quietly, his gaze fixed on her blind eyes. "You didn't run," Eleanor whispered. "You crawled into that burning cage with me. You didn't even know me. You were just a young mechanic's apprentice driving home from a late shift. You squeezed through the twisted metal, took my hand, and you stayed. When I panicked, when I choked on the smoke, break time 05s. You looked right into my eyes, back when I could still see, and you told me to hold on." Thomas closed his eyes, the memory rushing back with vivid, terrifying clarity. He remembered the heat of the flames, the smell of burning rubber, and the fragile, break time equals 5s, terrified university student whose hand he had held for 45 agonizing minutes until the emergency crews could cut her out. "I remember," Thomas said softly. "I told you to close your eyes. I told you to listen to my voice and not let go of my hand. And I didn't," Eleanor cried softly. "But the moment they pulled me out, before the ambulance doors closed, you vanished. By the time the doctors stabilized me in the hospital, by the time the infections and the trauma took my eyesight permanently, you were gone. No one knew who the mystery bystander was. Why did you leave, Thomas? Why didn't you stay? I inherited my family's estate. I built this entire global empire. And I spent millions of pounds hiring private investigators to track down the man who saved my life. Why did you hide from me?" Thomas let out a long, ragged breath, looking down at his worn-out boots held together by industrial tape. The stark contrast between her multi-billion-pound world and his daily fight for survival had never felt more profound. "I didn't hide, Eleanor," Thomas said with a heavy, heartbreaking honesty. "The night of your accident, while I was holding your hand, my phone was ringing in my pocket. It was the hospital. My wife had gone into sudden, critical premature labor with our daughter, Poppy. The moment the paramedics took you, I drove like a madman to the hospital." He paused, the grief of the past weighing down his shoulders. "There were severe complications. My wife, she didn't make it, but she gave me Poppy. In the months that followed, my world completely collapsed. I was drowning in grief, drowning in medical bills, and trying to raise a newborn baby entirely on my own. I lost my job, fell into deep poverty, and had to take whatever low-end delivery shifts I could find just to buy formula." Thomas looked around the opulent penthouse office, then back at Eleanor. "Years later, I saw your face on a business magazine in a shop window. I read about the brilliant blind billionaire who took over the Hastings Whitmore Group. I knew who you were. But look at me. I'm a broken, struggling courier. If I had walked up to this tower and demanded to see the CEO, break time equals 05s, telling your security that I was the guy from the motorway, what would it look like? It would look like a desperate, poor man begging for a handout from a wealthy woman. I had nothing left, Eleanor, but I wanted to keep my dignity. I didn't save you for a reward. I saved you because it was the right thing to do." Eleanor listened, her hand over her mouth, her chest heaving as the devastating reality of his sacrifice tore through her heart. The silence that followed Thomas's confession was heavier than the storm outside. Eleanor stood frozen, her hands still trembling in front of her. The revelation of what he had lost that night, the tragic birth of his daughter, the crushing weight of grief and poverty, break time .05s, and his choice to protect his dignity rather than beg for a reward tore through her defences. A handout. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, thick with an agonizing sorrow. She reached out blindly until her fingers found his forearm once more, gripping him with fierce intensity. "Thomas, look at me. Break time =05s. You think I would have seen you as a beggar?" She let out a ragged breath, a bitter, emotional laugh escaping her lips as tears ran freely down her face. When the smoke cleared from that wreckage, the world I woke up to was pitch black. The doctors told me my sight was gone forever. My family left me their fortune, yes, but they left me entirely alone. The board members, the lawyers, the competitors. They looked at a 21-year-old blind girl and saw prey. Every single day for 10 years, people have approached me wanting something. A contract, a promotion, a piece of my wealth. She stepped even closer, her voice dropping into a deep, raw confession. "But you crawled into a burning furnace when I was nobody. You risked your life for a stranger and expected absolutely nothing in return. In those horrific first months of blindness, when the darkness felt like a tomb and I wanted to give up on life, do you know what kept me going? It wasn't the money. It wasn't the company. It was your voice. Every single night I would close my eyes and replay your words in my head. Keep breathing, Ellie. Listen to my voice. Break time .05s. I've got you. Your voice was the only anchor that reminded me there was still goodness in this world. You didn't just save my body on the M62. Thomas, you saved my soul." Thomas felt a profound ache in his chest. For 10 years he had viewed himself as a failure, a man chewed up and spat out by poverty, barely surviving from one delivery shift to the next. He had never imagined that his memory was the foundation upon which this multi-billion-pound empire had been built. Before he could find the words to respond, a faint, timid sound cut through the emotional gravity of the room. Tap, tap. It was a soft, hesitant knock against the heavy mahogany office door. Because the room was structurally soundproofed, the noise was barely audible. But to a woman who navigated the world entirely through sound, it was unmistakable. Thomas instantly snapped out of the moment, his internal clock violently resetting. Poppy! He had been gone for nearly 15 minutes. Panic seized him. "Eleanor, I'm sorry, I have to go. My daughter is downstairs in the lobby, and Marcus," Eleanor called out loudly, her voice instantly snapping back into its commanding corporate frequency. "Unlock the door!" The heavy deadbolt clicked open. Marcus stepped in, looking highly protective, but before he could speak, a tiny figure squeezed past his tailored suit. It was Poppy. She had grown frightened, sitting on the massive leather sofa in the grand lobby. Seeing her father go up the elevator and not return, the 6-year-old had used her quiet, stealthy nature to slip past the distracted reception desk and ride the service lift to the top floor. Her oversized second-hand winter coat trailed slightly on the plush carpet. Break time .05s, and she was clutching her half-finished coloring book tightly against her chest. "Daddy," Poppy murmured, her wide, innocent eyes darting around the massive, dark office until they locked onto Thomas. "I got scared. You took too long. Poppy, sweetie." "I'm so sorry," Thomas said, instantly dropping to his knees. He reached out, pulling his little girl into a tight, protective embrace. I'm sorry. Daddy is right here. You shouldn't have come up here, Bug." Eleanor froze the moment the child's voice reached her ears. The anger and corporate shielding completely dissolved from her face. She listened intently to the soft, rhythmic rustle of the child's oversized coat, the small, quick breaths of a frightened but brave little girl. Slowly, deliberately, the blind billionaire lowered herself onto the floor. She knelt directly on the charcoal carpet, break time un-fives, entirely unbothered by the dust or her expensive tailored suit. She reached her hands out into the empty space between them, her palms open, trembling with anticipation. "Poppy?" Eleanor asked, her voice softer than the morning rain. "Is that your name?" Poppy looked at the beautiful woman kneeling before her. Break time 0.05's children possess a rare instinctual understanding of vulnerability. She didn't see a powerful CEO. She saw someone who was searching for something in the dark. Slowly, Poppy stepped out of her father's protective grip. She walked over to Eleanor and gently placed her small, warm, crayon-stained hand directly into Eleanor's open palm. Eleanor's fingers closed around the tiny hand. She used her other hand to gently trace the coarse fabric of Poppy's worn-out sweater, feeling the unmistakable, gentle warmth of Thomas's lineage. As her fingers brushed against the child's soft cheek, the final walls around Eleanor's heart completely shattered, and she let out a sob that was 10 years in the making. The small, crayon-stained hand of Poppy resting inside Eleanor's palm felt like the final piece of a 10-year-old puzzle clicking into place. Eleanor gently squeezed the little girl's fingers, a soft, tearful smile breaking across her face. For a long moment, break time equals 05's, the only sound in the grand penthouse office was the rhythmic patter of the Manchester rain beating softly against the reinforced glass. Eleanor slowly stood up, smoothing down her tailored charcoal jacket. The vulnerability that had taken over her moments before was now replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. Break time our fives. She turned her blind eyes back toward Thomas, her posture straight and commanding once more. "Marcus," she spoke clearly, her voice echoing off the high concrete ceilings. "Yes, Miss Hastings," the security chief replied instantly, stepping forward. "Call downstairs to the transport pool. Tell my personal driver that my schedule for the rest of the day is completely cleared. Then take Thomas's delivery van keys, locate his vehicle in the bay, break time equals .05's, and ensure whatever remaining packages he has are transferred to a secondary courier immediately. The Hastings-Whitmer Group will cover the courier fees." Thomas blinked, his protective parental instincts immediately flaring up. He reached down, gently pulling Poppy back toward his side. "Eleanor, wait! You can't do that! That van is my livelihood. If I don't finish my route, my dispatcher will sack me before the sun goes down. I have rent due on Tuesday, and Poppy needs—" "Thomas," Eleanor interrupted gently, stepping around her desk. She held up a single elegant hand, her expression filled with a profound, quiet gratitude. "Your route is finished. In fact, your time as a courier is officially over." She took a deep breath, looking in his direction. 10 years ago, break time I'm .05's. You walked away from the M62 Motorway with nothing but a broken heart and a heavy burden. You gave up your own future to raise this beautiful little girl in the dark, never asking for a single penny from the world. But the universe has a strange way of balancing the scales. She braced her hand against the edge of her desk. I am not offering you charity, Thomas. I am offering you what should have been yours a long time ago. My company is currently restructuring our entire northern UK infrastructure. We desperately need a head of fleet logistics and corporate security operations. Someone who understands vehicles. Brake time equals 05s. Someone who knows these roads perfectly, but above all, someone whose integrity cannot be bought or broken by anyone. She stepped closer, her blind eyes shining. I have thousands of employees, Thomas. I have brilliant minds from London and elite security details from across Europe. But in 10 years, I have never met a single soul I could trust implicitly with my life. You proved who you were in the fire at mile marker 14. Come work for me. Let me protect your family the way you protected me when I was completely helpless. Thomas stood completely frozen. He looked at Eleanor, then down at his small daughter, Poppy, who was looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. For 6 long years, a heavy, suffocating weight had sat directly on Thomas's chest. The daily terror of empty bank accounts, the shame of worn-out boots held together by tape, and the constant fear of failing the little girl his wife had left behind. Slowly, as he realized that the nightmare was finally over, that suffocating weight lifted. A ragged, emotional breath escaped his lips, turning into a quiet, disbelieving laugh. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes as he looked at the electronic clipboard on the floor. He stepped forward, picked up the stylus, and firmly signed his name on line 4. He wasn't just signing for a package anymore. Break time equals 05s. He was signing his name to a completely new destiny. Thank you, Ellie, Thomas said, his deep, resonant baritone thick with an emotion he could no longer hide. At the sound of her old name, spoken in that exact gravelly cadence, Eleanor smiled, a genuine, break time equal .05's radiant smile that completely banished the cold shadow of her corporate tower. Welcome home, Thomas. We often live our lives believing that our smallest acts of kindness go unnoticed. We walk through the storms of life, carrying heavy burdens, fighting battles that no one else can see, wondering if the sacrifices we make truly matter. But the universe keeps a perfect ledger. A hand held in the dark, a word of comfort spoken in a moment of absolute terror. Break time 05s, us just to protect your dignity over a reward. None of it is ever truly lost. True wealth isn't measured by the height of a corporate tower or the balance in a bank account. It is found in the silent, invisible threads of destiny that connect our souls across time and space. I break time equals 0.05s, and when you give to the world without expecting anything in return, the universe has a beautiful, unforgettable way of leading you exactly where you belong. What do you think? Was it pure coincidence that brought Thomas to Eleanor's office that rainy Saturday morning, or was it a destiny meant to happen? Break time .05s. Please share your emotional thoughts in the comments below. If this powerful story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to Hidden Princess. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable cinematic drama and powerful life reveal. Thank you for watching until the very end. And remember, never stop being kind in the dark.